first time his wife called you, it was 3:42 in the morning. Miami, rain against the panoramic windows. 52nd floor. Daniel is asleep beside you. The phone vibrates on the nightstand. You answer. A few seconds of silence. Then a woman's voice. Are you lying in my bed right now? Everything inside you turns cold. You look at Daniel, at his shirt on the floor, at the watch beside the bed. Excuse me? Your voice trembles. The woman laughs quietly. He always chooses the same type of girls. Daniel wakes up, takes the phone. Victoria. He listens silently, then starts getting dressed and said, I need to go to New York. Right now? Nicole, don't start. 5 minutes later, the door closes. You stay alone in the enormous apartment. And for the first time, you understand this is not your life. That's when everything really begins. You're 24. A year and a half ago, you worked as a hostess near Miami Beach. You lived with a mother addicted to pills. You were trying to pay rent and basic human needs. Daniel appeared in August. Fontainebleau, late evening, expensive watch, calm voice. A man who made everyone around him quieter without even trying. He left a $2,000 tip and with his number, and of course you sent him a message. The next day there was a package waiting for you at reception. Inside was a book, the exact book you casually mentioned during your conversation. You didn't even remember talking about it, but he remembered. A week later he rented you a suite at the Cité. A month later, an apartment in Brickell. Everything happened too fast. You got used to his smell, his hands, the restaurants, the driver, the jewelry, and slowly you stopped noticing that your entire life now depended on his messages. He could disappear for 3 days, then come back with flowers, hold you, say, I missed you, and you believed him every time. On that time you already meant about his wife. He rarely talked about her. Only you heard from him is, it's a complicated marriage. We've lived separately for years. You don't understand how families like this work. You never asked more questions because you were afraid of hearing the truth. The first time you saw Victoria was at a charity gala. White dress, pearls, calm smile. She didn't look like a wife. She looked like part of a system. People greeted her carefully, respectfully. She noticed you immediately and simply smiled. No jealousy, no anger, like she had just noticed a temporary inconvenience. Later that night, Daniel got angry for the first time. You shouldn't have gone there. But Daniel, you brought me there. Nicole, stop acting like a wife. Something inside you cracked after that sentence. You realized, no matter how expensive the apartment was, no matter how expensive the gifts were, no one was ever giving you the wife's place. After that, Victoria began moving quietly. First, your Instagram got blocked. Then photos of you and Daniel outside a hotel appeared online. The comments were everywhere. Homewrecker, whore, gold digger. Daniel only came the next morning. You expected support, but the first thing he asked was, did you tell anyone about us? That's when you understood. He wasn't afraid for you. He was afraid for himself. After that, you started living in constant anxiety. You checked his geolocation in the middle of the night, deleted Instagram, downloaded it again 2 hours later. You could sit by the window until sunrise because a car outside looked similar to his. Sometimes you opened the closet and smelled his shirts, like an addict. Victoria became an obsession. You started buying the same coats, the same hairstyle. You even started speaking more quietly. One day you caught yourself standing in front of the mirror trying to smile like her. That was the first time you became afraid of yourself, because slowly you were disappearing. You even started getting jealous of his children, because they had the one thing you never would, his last name. Sometimes Daniel showed up in the middle of the night. You could spend the whole evening crying, ignoring his calls, swearing you wouldn't answer anymore. Then, at 3 in the morning, he'd walk in quietly, take off his coat, come up behind you. I'm here. And somehow, that was enough. One winter night, you told him you missed snow. 2 days later, you were flying to Aspen. He always knew how to make you forget the bad parts. That was the problem. You never knew which version of him you were getting. The man who held your hand all night, or the man who could disappear for 2 weeks without a word. When you got pregnant, you thought everything would finally change. Now we'll finally become a real family. Daniel arrived that evening. You showed him the test. He stayed silent for a very long time, then finally said, fuck. Something inside you collapsed. You're not happy? He sat down, didn't touch you, didn't hug you. He just pulled out his phone. Did you tell anyone? Your stomach dropped. What? About the pregnancy. That was his first thought. Not the baby, not you. He started texting someone immediately, focused, cold. Only then did he cover his face with one hand. Nicole, nobody can know. In that moment, you finally understood. For him, you weren't love, you were risk. Victoria appeared in your life gradually. First through photographs, then through phone calls, then through fear. One spring afternoon, you were coming back from the grocery store. A black Mercedes was parked outside the building. Victoria was sitting inside. White coat, leather gloves, perfect hair. You knew immediately who she was. Victoria lowered the window. Get in. Your hands were shaking, but you got in. Victoria looked at you calmly, too calmly. You're very beautiful. You didn't expect that. She smiled slightly. Daniel always chooses beautiful girls. But do you know the problem with beautiful girls? They start confusing attention with position. Everything inside you tightened. Victoria wasn't trying to humiliate you openly. She spoke softly, almost politely, and that made it even more terrifying. She looked at the child seat in your car. The baby won't change anything. Then she looked back at you. Men like Daniel don't leave. They just get lost sometimes. After that, she drove away, and you stood in the parking lot for a long time, realizing Victoria had never considered you competition. You were simply another woman she had to outweight. You started receiving photographs. You outside your building. You outside the clinic. You in parking lots. Someone was following you. One night, a box appeared outside your door. Inside were baby shoes and a note. Don't destroy my children's future for your mistake. You called Daniel hysterically. He came, read the note. But instead of protecting you, he said, you need to calm down. At 8 months pregnant, you saw the article. Photos from a charity gala. Daniel and Victoria holding hands, smiling. The headline read, "One of America's strongest marriages." You sat alone in the kitchen and finally understood the truth. You had been living inside someone else's family this entire time, and you were never part of it. Your son was born in November. Daniel came at night, held the baby in his arms. For a second you thought, now everything will finally change. Then Victoria called. You recognized it immediately by his face. He stepped into the hallway, came back colder, more distant. I have to go, and he left. You stayed alone in the hospital room holding your baby. After your son was born, Daniel started coming less and less. At first, you still waited for him. You got ready, did your makeup, ordered the food he liked. Every time someone stepped off the elevator, your heart jumped. But most nights, the door never opened. You sat alone in the huge apartment with a baby in your arms. One winter night, your son developed a high fever, almost 104. You called Daniel 7 times. He never answered. At 4 in the morning, you sat alone in the emergency room holding your baby, mascara smeared, hoodie over your pajamas, and scrolling Instagram. Victoria had posted a photo, Christmas. Daniel with his children and Victoria. Perfect American family. You sat under the cold hospital lights and suddenly understood he had never felt guilty, not once. Because in his mind, his real family was there, not here. After that, you started falling apart. The apartment slowly turned into a prison. Baby bottles, silence, waiting. Daniel started sending money through his assistant. Not personally. You looked at the payment notifications and stopped feeling like a woman. You felt like a hidden expense. Months later, Daniel came again. Your son had started walking. He didn't stay long. He played with his son for 5 minutes, laughed once, checked his phone twice, then left without saying a single word. And somehow, you almost believed again. That was the worst part. Even after everything, you still loved him. When your son turned 1, Daniel came for the last time. No driver, no security. He looked older, exhausted. He sat at the kitchen table staring down for a long time, then finally said, "Victoria knows everything." You started laughing, loudly, because in that moment you finally saw the entire story clearly. You looked at Daniel and understood. This was the real ending. Your son was asleep in the next room. What about him? Daniel closed his eyes. I'll help. Not, I'll stay. Not, he's my son. Help. Like charity. You spent 2 years trying to become part of a world that was never going to let you in. Daniel left before sunrise, like he always did. Only this time you knew he wasn't coming back. A month later, the apartment was gone. He left you without money. He cut you off completely from his life. You moved into a small apartment outside the city. Old couch, loud air conditioner, baby clothes stacked in boxes. You sat on the kitchen floor, surrounded by unpaid bills, and watched the news. Daniel and Victoria were everywhere. Your son was sitting at the kitchen table eating. Then he suddenly looked up. "Where is my daddy? And what is his name?" You stopped breathing. You looked at your child and said, "Daddy's name is complicated." God, even then you were still protecting Daniel. Your son nodded and went back to drawing. You walked into the bathroom and looked at yourself properly for the first time in months. Sunken face, tired eyes, a woman who once believed she would become part of someone else's perfect life. That evening you opened the news. Daniel and Victoria were attending another political dinner, smiling. Under the photo were hundreds of comments. Power couple, beautiful family, American dream. And finally, the real truth hit you. You would disappear from his story, completely. And Victoria would remain the official version of his life, forever. A year later, you work reception at a gym. Exhausted, thin, dark circles under your eyes. One evening, you see a young girl, beautiful, happy. An older man waits for her outside in a black Bentley, expensive suit, the same look. She laughs and gets into the car. You watch them drive away. And for the first time, you're not afraid for yourself. You're afraid for her. Because now you know how stories like this end. Not with love. Women like you disappear. And families like Victoria's continue living as if you never existed at all.